Hello and welcome to the continuation of your target market and segmentation video. As I said in class, one of the key things that a marketing person can do is segment and understand their market. Remember, in marketing, everything starts with who are you going to do what to. And segmenting your market and market segmentation is key because based on your target market and based on your segmentation method, you're going to develop advertising campaigns, pricing strategies, product strategies, as well as distribution strategies. The 4 Ps, or the marketing mix, as we've talked about, really involves understanding your target market and segmenting your market into subsegments so that you can serve them better. So at the end of the video, you're going to have a couple of discussion questions. Please turn them in to me on Tuesday or Thursday, depending on when your class is. And I look forward to seeing you either Tuesday or Thursday of next week. With that, let's get started. So in class, we talked quite a bit about the B2C, or business to consumer marketing segmentation, or segmenting. And really there's 6 bases of segmentation that we talked about. Now we're going to talk about business segmentation variables. You've got to remember there's producers, there's resellers, there's government, and there's institutions. Those are the 4 categories of business customers. Generally speaking, those business customers are segmented by customers' characteristics, large, small, geographic, etc., and also by buying processes, how they purchase and how they purchase that is different. So, sorry about that. So the company characteristics we're talking about is geographic location. Oftentimes, business customers are segmented by geographic location because, number one, the main marketing thing that we do for business to business is we have a sales force. So by segmenting by geographic location, it makes your sales force more efficient, and it also saves money on your sales force. Also, oftentimes, they're a type of company, whether you're a producer or a reseller or a wholesaler or something like that. Oftentimes, they're segmented by company size. The smaller the company, the more they're usually handled by internal sales reps. The larger the company, or the bigger the buying process, the more they're handled by external. Also, product use and what types of product that they are. Oftentimes, look at GE. They segment their customers for those that buy locomotives and those that buy light bulbs, etc., because they are such an eclectic company. And then finally, the volume of purchase. If they are heavy users or moderate users or light users, oftentimes that is the basis for segmentation. Generally speaking, heavy users have a sales rep that calls on them. Light users, generally speaking, will have a internal sales rep or a customer service person calling on them. So within the B2B market, there's really 2 types of buyers that have the buying process. One is satisficers and one is optimizers. Satisficers, generally speaking, are those companies that buy when their needs are met. The first company that comes along, they place an order with, the first company that has the product that they need at the price that they need at the delivery that they need. Optimizers, however, oftentimes are those business customers that are looking for multiple different suppliers. They send it out to bid. They're not going to take the first one. They really scrutinize those companies, etc. And those are called optimizers. They solicit bids, they study all the proposals, and they take a lot of time. Really, based on satisficers or optimizers, a company can also segment their market. If there's a satisficer, generally speaking, they're going to want to handle them with an inside sales rep, and they're going to want to stay on them. So whenever they need to order, you can call them and you can get them right there. Optimizers, oftentimes they need market development managers. You need sales reps, sometimes even marketing managers, to call on them to make sure that their bid is accepted. So the steps in segmenting a market, we talked a lot about this, so I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. But the steps in segmenting a market is, the first thing is you got to select a market or product category to study. And then you got to choose that basis for segmentation. Are you going to segment it based on geography, demographic, psychographic, a combination of both, kind of like generational segmentation. Then you're going to select the market descriptors. What describes this market? Is it described by geography? But it's a tough one to say. Is it described by geography? Is it described by income? Is it described by hobbies for psychographic segmentation? Is it described by geodemographics? So we're talking about a gender, a particular gender in a particular part of the world or part of the country or something like that. Then you've got to profile and analyze the segment to make sure that the segment is worthwhile tapping. You've got to make sure that the segment, and remember those 4 things we talked about at the beginning of the lecture, all the way back in the classroom. You've got to make sure that it's accessible and that it's sustainable and all those types of things. So you got to analyze the segment to make sure that you can actually make money by segmenting your market that way. You've got to select your market. And then, of course, you design and implement your marketing mix. As I said at the introduction, the marketing mix is totally dependent upon your target market. And that marketing mix, or as you know, include the 4 Ps: product, price, promotion, and place. So there's a couple of strategies that companies take. There's undifferentiated targeting strategies, which views every market the same. We've talked about this. Starbucks, Apple, and Coke views every market the same. Oftentimes, this is called global standardization. Harelam and McDaniel, your book, calls it undifferentiated targeting strategies, basically synonymous with a global standardization strategy. And then you've got concentrated target segmentation or targeting strategies, where you concentrate a strategy on a particular region and you go heavy in that region. For instance, one might be concentrated on in the United States, one in Europe, one in Asia, or one might be concentrated on for all females and one for all males. So lots of different ways. But what we're doing is we're having large chunks of our market and we're concentrating on that. And then finally, the one that's the most expensive and the hardest to do because it costs a lot of money and you've got to have a different marketing mix for each one, is a multi-segment targeting strategy, where you might really split up your segments into very small chunks and then hit each one of those chunks. Oftentimes, most companies don't do that because, again, it's very expensive. You've got to have your own advertising, pricing, and promotion strategy, and even distribution strategy for those small segments of the market. And because you have to have a different marketing mix for each one of those small segments, it becomes very expensive for a company to implement and execute that and then sustain that. Most of the time, you'll see a concentrated targeting strategy where they concentrate on large either geographies or large demographic segments or large psychographic segments, and they hit really hard with those demographic and psychographic segments. And that would be your concentrated targeting strategy. And that is really most of your companies out there. So we just talked about this. Here's the advantages and disadvantages. This is a really good slide for you to concentrate on because it makes great multiple choice questions. Hint, hint. And as you know, I like to give multiple choice tests. So please take a look at this slide and please make sure that you understand it. As you study for your next examination, make sure that you keep this one in mind. Porter has a strategy for segmenting the market. On the top axis is competitive advantage. If you have a strong competitive advantage in one way or the other. And then on the other one is competitive scope. Is it going to be broad or is it going to be narrow? For instance, overall cost leadership. That is a very competitive advantage. It's a low cost competitive advantage and it's a broad scope. Walmart is a particular, a really excellent example of that. Cost leadership would be Hyundai for automobiles and cars. And we just talked about cost leadership. Broad cost leadership would be sprint communications. We just did a case on that. So all of those would be broad cost leadership. Differentiation. They're higher costs, but there's a broad scope, but they differentiate their market either through quality or innovation or something like that. Disney is an excellent example of differentiation. Broad scope, high quality, just a great park to go to. Everything that Disney does is differentiated through higher cost but high quality. Higher cost but service would be IBM. Higher cost but innovation would be someone like Apple or Google. Would be higher cost with innovation. 3M would be higher cost with innovation. Narrow focused with low cost would be Dollar Tree. They've got a very narrow focus. They are specific to very low cost. They aren't as broad as would be a Walmart. They've got a more narrow focus in the products in which they offer and in the places where they distribute. Usually they're in strip malls, lower end strip malls. Another cost focus that would be narrow would be a local restaurant that really is more cost focused. I was just thinking about one the other day with a restaurant, and their hamburgers are like $9. It's very cost focused and very localized. I can't remember the name of it though. I'll think of it in a minute, probably by the time this slide is over or this video lecture is over. And then differentiation, narrow focus with higher cost would be, and oftentimes you're looking at a very high end type of product would be Rolex. I just talked about Armani and Armani suits. Higher cost, very differentiation, sold on very high quality, high fashion. Lamborghini, I wouldn't put Lexus there. I would put Lexus on differentiation, but Lamborghini, the Hummer H2, which I don't even think they make anymore, would be based on differentiation focus because there's not a lot of them. So it's something that's narrowly focused. Don't make a lot of them. They differentiate themselves either through very, very high quality or very high cost. I was just driving by the Can of Worms the other day and I saw Lawry's Natural Foods. Lawry's Natural Foods, higher cost, differentiation focus, very narrow. That would fit very well in that particular category. So we've talked about customer relationship management or CRM a lot. The reason that they bring CRM again into this chapter is by narrowing your focus or by segmenting your market, you can do a much better job of CRM. And it's easier to implement CRM if in fact you understand customized goods to a customized market. So if you go back, CRM would best be on the cost focus and the differentiation focus narrow because it's a smaller focused. However, you can also do CRM on a larger scale, and we see that a lot where people customize and differentiate on a larger basis. The more you can target, the more you can segment your market, the more you can slice and dice it to a very manageable segment, the higher the ability to execute customer relationship management. And again, customer relationship management is really strong. Good example of that would be Starbucks. Starbucks is it's a global standardization company. They treat every market the same, but they use CRM by doing something very simple, writing someone's name on the cup. So it's a way of being a global standardized company, but also having good CRM. So CRM, again, can allow marketers to target customers and to hit that customer market much better. So now let's get into positioning. I don't really like the perceptual mapping so much, so I don't really use it. But positioning influences potential customers' overall perception of a product. Something that's positioned high end would be very expensive, very exclusive, and very sought after to a higher income segment. Something that's positioned low end would be something that is very sought after to a income segmentation, a lower income segmentation. You can also position it middle of the road or competitive positioned, which means you're positioned with everybody else. That would be AT&T, who's positioned with, say, Verizon. So perceptual mapping is a way of looking at that positioning against competition. For instance, we just talked about Sprint. Sprint is positioned low end against their competition, which is AT&T, T-Mobile, and Verizon. You can look at Starter as a athletic brand, which is positioned on a perceptual map low end against, say, Nike and Reebok or Under Armour. And then you look at Champion, which is positioned competitively. They're not as expensive as Nike, but they're also more, and they're not as low end as Starter. So they're positioned on a competitive basis. They're kind of middle of the road. And a lot of companies are positioned middle of the road. If you look at, I can't think of another one. But anyways, that was the best example I've got. Repositioning is changing a consumer's perception of a brand. It's easy to reposition down. It's very easy to very difficult to reposition up. If you want to reposition up, oftentimes you change your name. For instance, Lexus is made by Toyota. Toyota has a competitive type of positioning strategy, whereas your Toyota Corolla competes with the smaller cars. Your mid-sized cars would be your Toyota. Can't think of the name of it. Man, I've got. Anyways, I'll think of it in a minute. Not Corolla, but Toyota. My office mate drives one. I can't remember the name of it. But anyways, that's positioned against, your Malibus and your mid-sized cars, etc. In order to have a high-end car, they repositioned and they came out with Lexus. Lexus is just a Toyota, but no one would pay $80,000 for just a Toyota, so they repositioned it as Lexus. Oftentimes you see companies repositioning under a different name, and that way, they've got a brand that's positioned on a higher end. So you see that quite often. That's your repositioning strategy. Look at the Marriott hotels, right? Marriott hotels wanted to reposition and go into the lower cost hotels, but they really didn't want to take down the name of the Marriott, because Marriott is very high-end hotels. So they've got a bunch of other different brands, Hampton and those other ones, that compete against the Holiday Inns, but it still maintains the luster and the austere positioning of the Marriott, which is a high-end hotel. So positioning is based on attributes, price, use, product class, etc. Attribute would be a product or feature associated with a particular product. Oftentimes, cell phones are positioned by attributes or feature. Price and quality is probably the easiest one to position. Oftentimes, lower priced products have a perception of lower quality. That is not necessarily true. For instance, I find the quality of Aldi's products as good as the quality of most Wegmans products. I find the quality of Aldi's products as good as manufacturer's brand, yet they are positioned low price. Aldi's is in upset oftentimes because they feel it is a cheap grocery store. But if you buy Aldi's products, even though they're not top brand names, they are still manufacturer's brands. And I find it very high quality. So that's price and quality. So oftentimes it's a misnomer. You can find good quality with good price out there. I think Champion has excellent quality with a competitive price, whereas I do think Nike has good quality, but it's a much higher price. Same thing with Under Armour, and I think Champion competes as well in quality with a very competitive price. You can also position it with use or application. Oftentimes, there's ways of doing that, and then you can position it as a product user. Product class here is positioned. Class would be, say, a class of car. Look at Mercedes. They have their C class, they have their E class, they have the other classes of cars. They're positioned that way. You can position it against your competitor. Oftentimes, Aldi's, we just talked about them, can position themselves against, say, a Wegmans or against a Tops or against a Kroger out there, and they find that they are positioned very, very well. And then finally, emotional position, and the best thing I can describe is the iPhone. You guys emotionally are attached to iPhones. Oftentimes, when you think about it, you wouldn't give up your iPhone even for another iPhone. You feel emotionally attached to that. Oftentimes, you're emotionally attached to it because it was your first phone. And you got your first phone, you liked it, you stuck with it. Sometimes it's, you have an emotion for a particular product or a food product because your mother used to buy it for you, or you had it when you went to your grandmother's house or something like that. So emotion is another way of positioning products. So that is going to do it for this video lecture. Here are your video questions or your discussion questions. Don't write War and Peace. You don't want to write it, and I don't want to read it. So just make sure you let me know what you're talking about. When I say, why is it important to a marketing manager? A couple of sentences will do. We talked about it. What does positioning mean? And give me an example of a product that is positioned high-end, competitive, and low-end. I gave you a number of them. I'd like for you to use your own, but if you want to use mine, that's fine. And then finally, in Porter's model, I gave you a ton of products that would fit in the differentiation square, and tell me why. Again, don't write War and Peace. Simply, please, just let me know that you know what you're talking about. And with that, I'm looking forward to seeing you on Tuesday or Thursday.